Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Wyman. I am the Government Access Coordinator for Falmouth Community Television. We're located at 310 Dillingham Avenue. So if anyone watching this wants to swing by and say hi, we're pretty much open from 2 to 10, typically staff are here, and 10 to 10 most days you can get in the building. I'm here today talking with Representative Dylan Fernandes. This is probably your third time here in our studio to do corporate.
Maybe to do this with you, but definitely been here close to a dozen times in total.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got a handful of things to update the folks of Falmouth on that Dylan is up to in Boston at the State House. Such things as criminal justice reform, Tony Andrews Farm. Some financing has been being adjusted in a nice property here in Falmouth. Some Sea Grant resolutions, talk some NOAA stuff too. So let's start off with the criminal justice reform. You said there was a bill in the House that has something to do with our area, maybe?
Yeah, well, this is one of the priorities for the House this session has been passing comprehensive criminal justice reform. And in America, we have the largest prison population in human history. And in Massachusetts, for being a kind of progressive, forward-thinking state, really isn't doing a good job in mitigating its prison population. And we have a lot of failed tough-on-crime policies from the 1990s that have proven to disproportionately impact our Black and Latino, Hispanic communities here across the Commonwealth. And so we've really made passing comprehensive criminal justice reform a priority to make sure that we're giving people from all backgrounds a fair and equitable and just shake. And so we passed this bill, comprehensive criminal justice reform, just a couple of months ago. It now goes to the Senate, and they've passed their own bill, and now it's in a conference committee. And so we're just hammering out differences between the two bills, and we're going to pass a broad criminal justice reform package through both the House and the Senate and put it on the governor's desk before the end of the year, which is really exciting. I mean, this is something that's a long time coming. It is one of those pieces of legislation that's going to be nation-leading. Massachusetts is going to pass the largest criminal justice reform in a generation here and probably in a generation in the United States. And we really hope that the rest of the U.S. looks to this as a model.
Excellent. Well, it's extremely important. And as you're saying, if we're running policies from the 90s at this point, and obviously they're failing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things was, there are so many components to this bill that we could dig into, but one of the things was, felony larceny. It was a felony if you steal $250. I mean, that's a felony. Wow. It goes on your record as a felony. That's a big deal. That can prohibit you from, securing employment and carries harder sentences. And so that's just something that, back in the 70s and 80s might have been a lot of money. Today, that's a quarter of an iPhone, right? So we need to bump up and change a lot of those larceny kind of thresholds. There's pieces around changing the age at which people are tried as adults. There's a lot of recent data from the past decade that shows that a teenager and someone in their young 20s, their brain doesn't stop developing, right, until you're around 25. But why are we treating people who are 18, who are still in high school, as adults and arresting them for crimes and putting them in an adult prison? We're looking to adjust that based on recent information on cognitive research and how people's brains are developing. There's pieces around ending mandatory minimums, which is really important. Mandatory minimums, especially for drug offenses. So for people who don't know, mandatory minimums is something where the justice system is not allowed. The judicial part of the justice system isn't allowed to look at a certain case and say, what you did merits X amount of years. They're just forced to give the perpetrator, to give the person who's been convicted a sentence based on a mandatory minimum. And that's something we want to change. We want to give judges the leeway to look at the entire case and make a decision that's right for that particular person. And so ending mandatory minimums, especially for drug offenses and Corey reform has been really important to make sure that people aren't recidivizing, people aren't immediately going back to prison, and making sure that we can secure employment and the like for people coming out. Has been really important. There's a number of pieces within this bill that we could get into, but those are some of the larger ones.
Yeah, it sounds like it has an economical repercussions about it too, if helping people find employment, or the felony being that it expanded or higher ages. That's having that on your record, as you're saying, and trying to get employment after that for someone who may not necessarily deserve that at this point. If the $250 is a felony at this point,
Right.
So well, appreciate all of that. It's good information, and I'm sure we'll ask you again about that after it clears. And
It is, yeah, and it's a great, and to get to the piece about the economic issue, one of the things as part of the bill is we've changed the date at which you can seal your records, and so we've lowered that threshold. We've lowered the timeline for sealing records for people who have misdemeanors or people who have felonies, so that if you make a mistake when you're when you're in your young 20s or something like that, it's not something that carries with you for the rest of your life.
Right.
It will only really carry. It will carry with you depending on what it is, but 5 years misdemeanor, 7 years felony. So less than a decade on your record for both cases, and that's really important to give people a second shot.
Excellent. Well, switching gears a little bit, we promised a quick discussion on Tony Andrews' farm. It's a parcel of land in Falmouth. I think it was last town meeting, some funding was secured to purchase some of this land. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, this has been a great partnership between the town of Falmouth, the 300 committee here in Falmouth, and our state government. Falmouth, the 300 committee, have been really invested in securing this really unique property, gorgeous property.
It really is.
Here in Falmouth, and securing it and maintaining it as a farm, and keeping, there's something to be said about Tony Andrews' farm, not just about preserving open space here in Falmouth, which is important, but also just kind of the history of the property, the farming history here in town, and also I know you've been out there, but for anyone who hasn't been out there, it's gorgeous. It's right on a little pond. It's just a terrific piece of property that we want to make sure stayed kind of out of development and in the town's hands. And so through an effort of Senator DiMacedo, Rep. Vieira, and myself, we reached out to Secretary Beaton's office and the executive branch, and we sent a letter of support for a grant application, and we were able to help advocate for over $400,000 in funding, state funding, for the town to purchase this property. And we secured it, and that's really exciting news, not only for the town, but also future generations here in Falmouth to be able to enjoy this property and really get a unique kind of Falmouth farming experience.
And you can purchase hyperlocal vegetables and other produce. I think it's some warmer climate of the year, but they have little stands out there you can go and sometimes you can maybe pick some of your own fruits and vegetables too.
Yeah, well, they have a terrific stand right on the property where you can get some amazing produce, and then Falmouth has been floating out a couple ideas on who's going to run it. I think I saw in the paper recently that they actually picked someone. One of the exciting things about local farming, and Tony Andrews' farm in particular, is there are a lot of young people who want to get involved in farming, and especially kind of local farming co-ops. And so I think this is a good opportunity to get young people more interested in farming in Falmouth.
Yeah, absolutely, and get some involvement in the community and just springboards from there.
Yeah.
So good things. Now, something that we talked about before we started that I was unaware of is the Sea Grant resolution. And you were talking about something on the federal level about trying to cut funding for Hui or moving to New Bedford. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so basically in President Trump's federal budget last year, and it's looking this year as well, they're trying to cut the Sea Grant program. And the Sea Grant program is this terrific program administered locally by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and And MIT up in Boston also has a piece of the Sea Grant in Massachusetts. And we need to make sure that this grant is fully funded because it helps the Cape and Islands and Falmouth with a number of issues. One, the most recent oil spill, they actually played a role in. There's an oil spill down in Woods Hole that they helped mitigate, but there's a whole host of environmental issues that they tackle: shellfish propagation, nitrogen mitigation, and the like. And so this is a really important program for our region, and it's not only important for us, but the entire coastline of Massachusetts. So I filed a resolution in the House of Representatives that is we're collecting signatures for right now, and we hope to collect dozens of legislators to sign on to this resolution to send to our federal delegation and send to the White House to let them know that this is something that we absolutely do not want them to cut, and these are funds that are helping boost the environment and economic opportunity in our local communities.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we don't want any of that to not happen. I mean, imagine if that oil spill happened and there was really no mechanism of following up with that. Anyway, so NOAA, and I misspoke, it was NOAA that you had mentioned it was possibly moving.
Well, NOAA's not moving anywhere, but there's been talk from a couple other regions like Rhode Island and New Bedford about trying to move NOAA to their local communities.
Okay.
That to me is completely unacceptable, and that into the Cape and Islands delegation is unacceptable. NOAA is a terrific community partner in Falmouth. They supply nearly 300 jobs for Falmouth and the local region, really kind of dynamic jobs in science and technology and administration. And so we need to make sure that NOAA stays in our local communities. And so one thing that we're working on is we're sending a letter to the new administrator at NOAA to make sure that they understand that this is something that the Cape and Islands needs and something that we will find unacceptable if they move. And it's something that the federal delegation is on board on. Senator Warren, Senator Markey, Representative Keating, through collaboration with them, they've all reached out to NOAA as well to make sure that it stays in the Woods Hole facility, and the town of Falmouth gets that economic benefit from the jobs here.
Absolutely.
And we have in Falmouth one of the most unique scientific research hubs in the entire world. I mean, we really are the world's research hub for marine biology and ocean research. And so making sure that NOAA can stay in Woods Hole and collaborate with places like the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, the Marine Biological Laboratories, the Woods Hole Research Center is really important because scientific integrity is really important, really anytime, but particularly now, and making sure that they're insulated in an environment that promotes scientific integrity is really important, and that's what that our community in Falmouth is all about.
Yeah, it's a very prideful thing for us in the scientific community. You're absolutely right. And losing those jobs obviously would be the most important and heavy loss. But yeah, just that integrity and pridefulness of
and a lot of the scientists here in Falmouth, we're fortunate. A lot of them are very active community members, and we benefit from really cutting edge knowledge at places like town meeting, where people will stand up and say, hey, I see this bylaw you're considering about an estuary. Well, look, I'm actually the global leader on estuaries or something like that, right? And so we really benefit not only from the economic perspective in terms of the jobs that these institutions create, but really the people within them give back so much to our local community.
Oh yeah, I mean the first person for me that comes to mind just because of recent events, I mean someone like a Betsy Gladfelder who's done so much work and so much effort up in the Coonamessett River area and restoring that, and that work's being done right now.
Yeah.
So if anyone's watching and wants to go take a look at that amazing feat of engineering. I guess the river's starting to flow now.
Yeah.
I was told for the first time in 300 years. So
Yeah.
that's just one example of a person that is attracted to this area because of that.
No, that's great. And that reminds, so I went to the groundbreaking for that, and it was a terrific event. And, we have lost, the estimates vary, but some put it at 98% of the river herring in New England, which is crazy. And that's in large part because of these dams and the obstruction of traditional river runs, but also from these large trawlers that have intense and exorbitant amounts of bycatch. And these large commercial trawlers can take in and destroy herring populations. And a lot of times it's hard to differentiate between the river herring and the sea herring. And so that's one thing that we as a Cape delegation recently did. We sent a letter to NOAA and the fisheries management folks in Washington requesting that they change the operations of these large commercial trawlers that are devastating our river herring and our sea herring populations in our region.
Yeah, and someone might think, it's just a species of fish, but that species of fish in an ecosystem like that has huge drastic effects on other animals, and eventually it gets up to our level, and soon enough we'll start seeing some effects of that in our own daily lives. So important stuff. Totally switching gears.
Yeah.
Not totally. I mean, still under the realm of science, but like medical science now. You were speaking earlier. There's things going on up in Boston regarding Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah. So Alzheimer's. I mean, Barnstable County is the oldest county in Massachusetts. One of the oldest counties in the nation, and I represent part of Barnstable County, but also Nantucket and Dukes counties as well, which are not far behind Barnstable County in being some of the older populations in the state. And right now in Massachusetts, there are 120,000 people who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and that number is supposed to increase by 25% before the end of the decade, because we have an extremely, compared to the rest of the country, we really have an aging population here in Massachusetts. And that's something that we need to address because, there are extreme costs associated with Alzheimer's, not just the costs to kind of family welfare and dealing with it emotionally, but there are huge financial costs associated with it. And Massachusetts is going to be footing a large portion of that bill from our own healthcare costs. So it's something we need to address. So I voted to support a bill just last week that set up an Alzheimer's council in our government to make sure that we are studying the issue and assessing on how best to address it here in Massachusetts. It also sets up recommendations for hospitals who treat elderly patients to make sure that they have the correct guidance on dealing with people who have Alzheimer's and dementia, because a lot of hospitals aren't set up to address folks who are going through that. And also it sets up some guidance and recommendations for caregivers and people who are serving patients with Alzheimer's. So it's a really necessary piece, especially for Massachusetts, where we have a growing elderly population.
120,000 people just in Massachusetts. Yeah, that is a staggering number.
And it's going to keep going up and up. And so it's really important that we take action now. And that's why this bill was really timely. And we hope that this council will help advise on future policies that we can look at and move forward on as well. So unfortunately, Alzheimer's is it's a really tough disease to deal with. And right now there's just no cure. And it's not only Alzheimer's, I should have mentioned earlier, it's dementia as well, what the council is going to be looking at.
Yeah, it's a spectrum when you get into that. I mean, in the symptoms and situations are individualistic, so it's expensive for families, as you were saying. So
it's really hard. Yeah.
It is really hard, financially, emotionally, economically. So we'll keep tabs on that. That's for sure. Circling back a little bit, you touched on global warming, and we were talking about some carbon pricing things that are happening up in the Beacon Hill too. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So carbon pricing is something that's getting a little bit of attention up on Beacon Hill. It's something that I support, putting a price on carbon. Right now, when you go buy gas or buy any type of fossil fuel, you're not paying the real price for it because there's a lot of externalities to that. There's a lot of negative effects that aren't factored into the price that you pay at the pump or elsewhere. That's a real problem, and I come from an economics background. Every economist agrees on every side of the economist spectrum agrees that if we want to really address global warming and address climate change, we need to put a price on carbon. And so one of the proposals that we've been looking at the State House more recently, and this is a group of kind of younger environmentalist legislators like myself, is Massachusetts is looking at potentially moving forward on lowering the sales tax from I believe 6.2% to 5%, and that could be really problematic for our budget because we'd lose a ton of money. We might have to cut significantly back on some important programs, and so that is an initiative that's going to the voters in November, and the voters look like that's something that they might be favorable on, they might pass. And so how do we kind of restore that lost revenue so we don't have to cut important programs to people in a way that isn't affecting the retailers, because the retailers are the ones that are pushing really hard for this sales tax reduction. And so we've been kind of mulling and kicking around a proposal about taking that that loss in revenue and turning that into an equivalent carbon price, so that we have the same amount of revenue coming into the state, but instead of paying for that on at a retailer, you're paying for that on something like at the pump or in a utility bill or something like that, which I think is a good way to capture the same amount of money, but also discourage something that we all need to discourage, which is the use of fossil fuels. And then, the bottom, we've been kicking around some proposals, but the bottom quintile, the bottom kind of 20%, would certainly be reimbursed for any tax they pay, because we want to make sure it's not a regressive tax on our neediest. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we need to advance carbon pricing, and we think that this is a way to do it where people won't be paying any more taxes than they're doing right now. So it might be kind of an innovative way to advance carbon pricing that is more palatable, because people won't be paying any higher taxes.
Interesting stuff. I mean,
we'll see what happens. I mean, it's new because this ballot initiative is new, but the time for carbon pricing is now. We only have so much time to address global warming, and the hope is, Massachusetts can address global warming on its own, but if we can be one of the first states to really tackle carbon pricing, then it's something that the rest of the nation can look to and address as well. And Massachusetts has a long history of being the first on really innovative policies that have spread to the rest of the nation. And if this is something that could spread to the rest of the nation, we might actually have a chance of addressing global warming and climate change.
Yeah, it's a slow process when you don't have everyone even agreeing that it exists.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different issue.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
Well, we've talked about some interesting things today, Dylan, so I appreciate you coming in today. Is there anything else you want to add, or any thoughts that you've had that we haven't spoken about?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I recently, I think it was in the Falmouth Enterprise, I recently came back from surgery. I had over a 2-pound tumor removed from my leg. My scar is about this big. So it's taken a little while to get back into action, but our team is kind of right back in it now. And I just want to say that I really appreciate the folks from Falmouth, everyone who reached out, and I received hundreds upon hundreds of messages and cards, and it was really heartwarming for me, and really, really something that meant a lot to me. So I'm still recovering, but I really appreciate the support and the help from the Falmouth community.
Yeah, well, you look good. You've got a smile on your face, so
Yeah.
moving forward, and I hope you have a speedy recovery and you're at 100% soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thanks, folks, for joining us. This has been FCTV with Jeff Wyman here with Representative Dylan Fernandes for a legislative update. Thanks for watching.